Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, the genesis of the universe, the grey stone of red-hot sand, from the pages of history. Egypt, the new city of Cairo, the result of a wave of modernisation that had there crashed. The site it offered, if you excluded the lack of green, was not all that different from that of any European country. Near a street corner, two men walked in the middle of the crowd. "Then what are you going to do?" one of them asked with a dejected look. He wore a worn student cap and a long uniform, almost like a coat. A gold chain clinked by its neck. "Did we come here for tourism or not?" The man, whose eyes gave off an icy gleam like that of a Japanese blade, approached the old man who stood next to him. It was in a certain manner bizarre, the effect the school uniform had on him. The warrior side which prevailed over his appearance was light years removed from the world of a student. He dealt with countless fights, and gave off the feeling of a veteran of war. That man's name was Jotaro Kujo. "Polnareff will also be back soon. He left to search the city. Let's go back to the hotel, our base." The slightly tilted hat allowed a glimpse at an impeccably white goatee. The old man, judging from his constitution and skin colour, must have been around his 60s. The short beard and the hair that was sticking out from under the hat seemed to clash with the rest of the body. Joseph Joestar, Jotaro's grandfather, a brave warrior who's lived through many battles and, in his younger days, saved the world from a being who declared himself to be the ultimate life form. "You're going to let me act alone, aren't you?" Jotaro's unexpected remark left Joestar at a loss of words. "We've got time till the sunset. In fact, if an enemy assassin were to come, it'd be even more convenient." "Wait a moment, Jotaro. It could be extremely dangerous. We are in Cairo, the headquarters of the assassins. As far as we know, there could be a ton of stand users in hiding here." "I get it, Gramps." His voice was dripping with nervousness and indignation. "There's not that much time left. What do you plan on doing about your own safety?" "Well," he said, not listening. Then he turned on his heel and, completely ignoring Joestar's "We'll meet at the hotel before sunset, okay?" headed into the crowd. "Is there little time left?" Joestar muttered to himself, watching Jotaro's retreating figure. Surely the time limit was near. Until then, Dio, lurking somewhere in this city, must be defeated. Dio Brando, an immortal man who, after surviving for a century at the bottom of the ocean, had stolen the body of Jonathan Joestar, Joseph Joestar's grandfather. Indeed, Joestar had set out on a journey alongside his grandson Jotaro to defeat the man who was hiding somewhere in Cairo. It was to save Holly, Joestar's daughter as well as Jotaro's mother. At that very moment, her body was being weakened by her own stand, which had manifested in her. For those who did not possess a fighting spirit, a stand was a negative influence afflicting the body. That's why her stand ability had made her so weak. It probably all had to do with the fact that in her blood, that of the Joestars, flowed Dio's negative influence. Lying in bed, Holly fought against her own decline. The time limit Joestar mentioned was actually for saving Holly's life. Over 40 days had gone by since they'd set out on their quest from Japan. They now had 3 days left. Muttering to himself, Joestar turned his gaze after Jotaro, who was now gone among the crowd. The sun, filtering through the cracks in the rundown houses, was starting to head towards the west. Drops of sweat, like stolen gems, streaked the cheeks of the man and fell to his chin. It was Polnareff who, slowly dragging himself at a snail's pace, recalled the unpleasant feeling of sweltering heat. "I must find out who this enemy is. What kind of power does that bastard have? And how many stand users will be there?" he wondered all at once. He stood on a squalid alley, far from the heart of the city, around the north area of the Al-Darb al-Amar neighbourhood. A small cramped path flanked by stone walls. From behind him, he carefully watched out for anything in his surroundings. "I haven't the faintest idea from where and under what circumstances will the enemy make its entrance. I could get away through the main street, but that won't work. My right arm's covered in bruises, and the pain has raised my heartbeat. Even if I ran like hell, I'd still be defenseless against any enemy that shows up." "Enemy?" Polnareff whispered. Right, only an enemy would bare his teeth and clearly display an intention to kill. Still, this is no joke. The stand can only belong to one person. That's the rule. Regardless, no matter how many and who they are, they'll target me. A seemingly monstrous demon, a giant with Tutankhamun's mask, an enormous Arrakis demon, cobra, a multitude of mummies, a stone colossus, etc., etc. There was no end to it. Polnareff had found himself fighting on his own against that wide variety of monsters. In the end, having backed into a corner, he had evaded and ran to this alley. It was for sure a stand, yet the monsters were of flesh and bone. Maybe it could be the product of an illusion created by a stand. While muttering to himself, he absent-mindedly bumped the hand on his injured arm. It caused a stinging pain, like getting an electric shock. These wounds prove it. It wasn't fake in any way. What do I do now? How will I get it off my back? How many enemies are there? What are they hiding? How will I deal with them? He was absorbed in a web of thoughts. The afternoon sun boiled the sizzling body of Polnareff hiding in the alley. The dry air ran over his wounds. Perhaps from the blood loss or a heat stroke, he was taken by a spell of vertigo. He was left without a choice. He had to call on whatever little fighting spirit he had left. He was at his limit. The stand manifested at his back. His flesh and blood body was what housed the chariot. His will of steel was what controlled the stand. He could stand on his feet, but had started feeling himself taken by mental fatigue. Polnareff overlaid himself over silver chariot, just to contain at least some of his physical and mental weakening. In that same instant, the sound of a horse's hooves was heard. 4 horses, actually. The noise of hooves became louder and louder, underscored by the squeaking of steel reels, like the springs of a worn mattress. Is it a chariot? What, in a city like this? It was the downtown area. The carriage ran through Cairo streets, scoffing at the city's modernization. But that echo that could be felt was not that far away for someone. The sound of hooves was slowly approaching Polnareff. No way. He couldn't even finish his sentence, shocked as he was. He could only stare at the strange thing destroying the brick walls, approaching him. A chariot! It was some sort of chariot of war, which also coincided with part of his stand's name. A chariot with 4 armoured horses, an iron-plated chariot, square and rough. In addition, atop it stood a soldier as motionless as a statue. That was certainly a war chariot used in the times of the Roman Empire. Indeed, there was no doubt. I must have gone mad. What the hell is something like this doing in the 20th century? And in a city like Cairo? Silver chariot! An instant of confusion, and then he unleashed his stand. Too late! The crash of something falling apart was heard. The right arm was bent the wrong way, and the left leg was run through by an excruciating pain, like it had been struck by a hammer. Polnareff's deadly offence had been mitigated by the chariot's raging approach. He was launched into the air. The surrounding landscape, which blended seamlessly with the sunlight, flew away vertiginously from his sight. Only after, in a state of half-consciousness, did he realise he'd been thrown to the ground by the chariot. The shape of the hooves, which had struck him repeatedly, was imprinted on his forehead. It was after that fall that he fell unconscious. The chariot, after unleashing its destructive fury on the surroundings, came to a stop near Polnareff, who was lying helplessly on the ground. The 2 front horses in full armour neighed ravenously. Immediately afterwards, the chariot vanished into a mist without a sound. Perhaps that had been an illusion in broad daylight. But could Polnareff have really been defeated by some illusion? By no means. A cloud of dust had left behind hoofprints of the war horses all over the place, as well as the gashes of the chariot. At that very moment a voice rang out, the croaking voice of an old man, a tone so stentorian that it held the power of, in some way, imposing itself. Would a demon speak in such a way?
The year 30 BC,
the voice began.
In other words, the last year of the Ptolemaic dynasty under Octavius, Egypt becomes the possession of the Roman Empire.
The croaking voice kept speaking in the dust cloud.
In that period, in Egypt appeared the shapes of ancient Roman war chariots. This is a chapter of the grand history that I myself have documented.
That being resembled a mummy. There was no way to tell its gender with certainty. From the head hung some utterly dirty wraps. The face that could be glimpsed through the slits was covered in countless wrinkles, and even the arms, which extended from between the bandages, looked like dried-up branches. The bony and shriveled hands clutched an ancient papyrus codex. Those brownish sheets almost looked like they were part of the hands. The old man tucked them between the wrappings with a rustle, and approached Polnareff, who was still collapsed on the ground. Jean-Pierre Polnareff, user of silver chariot, was lying there motionless. He was wounded on his hands and sides. His blood spread all around him, dried immediately under the sunlight. By now a scarlet stain had formed on the ground.
One down,
the old man spluttered with a sinister air, smiling under his wrappings. Then he turned his back on him and vanished amid the Cairo bustle. The Genesis of Universe. Ladies and gentlemen, you surely must recognize it. It's the title of a mysterious book which narrates the past throughout eternity. In ancient Egypt, where culture was significantly developed, many books were created for papyrus, the origin of the paper we now use. Their contents covered a wide variety of subjects, ranging from history books compiled by scholars to personal diaries. When the Genesis of Universe was brought into light from the ruins of ancient Egypt, it was thought at first that its writings did not exceed the single volume. In 1908, British explorer E. Stevenson partook in a research expedition in the Valley of the Kings, also known for Tutankhamun. The expedition, of course, caused a great fuss, but at first he only scoured the surroundings of the Valleys of the Kings and had no satisfactory finds. Only afterwards, while digging underground, were unearthed some documents written in hieratic. However, right when the writings were quickly deciphered and the name of the Genesis of Universe assigned to them, Stevenson vanished from the face of the earth. What was behind his mysterious disappearance? There are clues. Here's an overview by Stevenson of the Genesis of Universe, obtained from a reputable source. I cannot begin to explain how dreadful the contents of this book are. You only need to know which causes chills. Ptah is the Egyptian god of creation. This book narrates the revelations of god Ptah and of Ani, the scribe who wrote them down. It's somewhat terrifying, the history of an Egypt of thousands of years ago is told to you. The summary of the book carried on. Historical documents which have Genesis as their theme exist by the hundreds. The first chapter begins at the time of the first dynasty, around 3000 BC. Then it continues through the many pharaohs until it arrives at Egypt's takeover by Octavius, around AD 30. So far, so good. Then the problems start cropping up. The fall of the Roman Empire, the invasion by the Crusades, the prosperity of the Ottoman Empire. The history follows up to AD 1500, but how come that's in a book written during the era before Christ? The Middle Ages also show up recorded. At this point, the writing begins to become tangled. Here we discover Stevenson's state of confusion, although we'll still try to reproduce his words. Still, I wish to continue anyway, because the real issue begins here. The outbreak of the conflicts between Turks and Egyptians, the opening of the Suez Canal, Egypt's declaration of independence. And it's at this point that it impossibly reaches our times. What sort of book could this be? Maybe it wasn't written in an era before Christ. Maybe I'm dreaming all this and I don't know it. And yet this book is real. Did someone add appendices? However, it ends here. Stevenson's summary is interrupted at this point. How come? The reason's simple. While writing it, he was struck by a heart attack and died. There are also those who sustain he was killed by a stroke. It was the 1st of January, 1913. Furthermore, that crucial book disappeared with him, to who knows where. At the same time, Stevenson's report was written off as a fit of madness or of pure and simple mental disorientation. After all, the book, which could certify what he'd written, had suddenly vanished. What's the truth? By now we've gotten an answer. Jean-Pierre Polnareff was the proof. The Genesis of Universe. Joestar and Jotaro were still unaware of the existence of such arcane prophetic writings. By becoming a scribe, I would have hoped my name would be remembered for a long time. Not graved on a tombstone, but engraved in a book. The human being rots and returns to the ground as ashes. A book like this, instead, can reside in human memory for eternity. Joestar read in a low tone, while observing a souvenir papyrus seller in the middle of the street. Oh, these are famous phrases from ancient Egypt. Ah, indeed! This was written by a young aspiring scribe, unknown author. That's about right. Well, you seem to know a lot about Egypt. My family, the Joestars, come from England. The influence of that blood has always made me intrigued by ancient history. Ever since I retired, I've been spending my time browsing through the books of explorers. Indeed, England boasts a tradition of great explorers, and I can safely say that English blood still flows even in yourself, Mr. Joestar. Joseph was heading towards the newer part of Cairo. Beside him treaded the giant with a dark face, hair short and braided, the neck adorned by a peculiar necklace. Mohammed Abdul, stand warrior, who travelled alongside the three companions, Jotaro, Joestar, and Polnareff. So, Joe started in a severe tone, soon it'll be dark. Dio is a vampire. He fears daylight and thus can only act in the darkness. Let's go. We're returning to the hotel. It will be best to join Jotaro and Polnareff, who went searching. Indeed, it's best not to properly disperse our strength. From tomorrow on, we should stop splitting up like this. In any case, until we pinpoint where Dio's lair might be, there's nothing we can do. That's what Joestar was about to say. The airflow changed. It's not something you can put into words. And anyway, let it be said that Joestar was gifted with a developed sense of intuition after many years of battle. He could easily tell when danger was near. You feel that, Abdul? Yes. You too, Mr. Joestar? Surely they don't intend to start a fight in the middle of the city. It doesn't look good. We could get the passerby involved. They scanned their surroundings. The sun was becoming tinted in blood red. On the streets, silhouettes of hundreds of people hurried on their ways home. In that throng, a foreigner with the air of a tourist would stand out. The roads were overflowing with cars. We can't deal with an attack here, Abdul. Let's go into that alley. I'm sure the enemy won't lose track of us. Exactly! Joestar quickly sprinted into the small street to the right. Finally, the two found themselves side by side in that alley. It'd be a difficult battleground for anyone, even for their opponents. Joestar had been right. In those kind of circumstances, they had a 50% chance against the enemy. Now. At the end of the alley was a nauseating smell of rubbish, or a repugnant smell. The street was very roughly asphalted. There was even an abandoned bicycle wreck. Where will the enemy come from? After making sure there wasn't a soul in the area, Joestar gave a slight smile. Abdul also assumed the same cocky expression. Hermit purple! Magician's red! The fury of the duo materialized in the air. Joestar's fighting spirit manifested through the thorny vines of Hermit Purple, while Abdul's spirit was incarnated in the flaming rapture of Magician's Red. And so they unleashed their stands, getting ready for an eventual attack. Turning back to back, they remained alert, prudent and impeccable, and, not foreseeing a surprise attack from the sides, one hugged the wall of the tall buildings on the right, and the other the left. However, the enemy's move was beyond what they could have imagined. What? Huh? They examined each other with a suspicious look. Joestar rubbed his eyes. Abdul remained staring. How absurd, Mr. Joestar. Where in the hell did we walk into? Really, what kind of place is this? Well, I also don't get what happened. But this... A large stone temple. Above it, a platform on which stood 42 elders dressed archaically. Before the eyes of both, a huge weight scale. On one dish, a bird's feather. On the other, a steel-beating heart. We're at the gates to the underworld. What are you saying, Mr. Joestar? This is the scene of judgment at the gates of the underworld, dreamed of by the ancient Egyptians. Certainly, anyone who dies is judged by 42 judges. It matches the description seen in many books. So for us, this is it? I don't think so. I'm sure this is a ploy by the enemy. Maybe they have a stand which can manipulate illusions. Abdul lost his patience and shouted, unleashing Magician Red's power at his back. We shall find out! With a roar and a plentitude of sparks scattering everywhere, Magician's Red burst into flames, painting Abdul's features in red. Attack, Magician's Red! Turn into flames and destroy this apparition for good! The stand, assuming the appearance of a scarlet comet, tore apart savagely every element in that scene. It's an illusion! Abdul shouted, while Magician's Red's flames roasted the line of 42 judges. It appeared like an infernal sight of bodies writhing in pain. Abdul! But how? The old men, who had caught fire like they were paper, were human beings of flesh and blood. They wore on their faces expressions of pain and anguish, the smell of burning hair, the sizzling of roasting flesh, wails, screams, and furious voices. Stop it, Abdul! Disperse your Magician's Red right now. That isn't just an illusion. It's real. They're human beings. They're of flesh and blood. That isn't possible. However, Joestar's yelling did not reach Abdul. Abdul! Finally, Abdul replied by stopping Magician's Red in its destructive fireball, but by then the 42 old men were charred embers. Even the weight scale they had in front had been turned into a pile of ashes. My hermit purple. The vines growing out of Joestar's arms had buried themselves into the pavement, and it had been through this exact method that Joestar had inferred that that was no illusion. I can only say this. This isn't fake, but it's also not something real. Damn it! Besides this, my hermit purple can't see anything. And yet, it usually can tell apart real from fake. That was also the case in Hong Kong. He even managed to expose a perfect imitation of a Rolex. Even if it's one of Hermit Purple's specialties, this time I can't tell for sure if it's an illusion or not. Calm down! I told you to calm down! In any case, Joestar focused on pacifying Abdul, who was clearly very distraught. Mr. Joestar, I've done something unforgivable. I burned them one by one. It was my own Magician's Red. Relax. It was a vision. Come on. It couldn't be anything else. Joestar was lying, but he did so only to reassure Abdul. Not at all. I acted on impulse. My stand really carbonated them, Mr. Joestar. Even you must be aware of this. A thud. Something collapsed. It was the heap of bones of one of the old men who'd been set on fire. It was like the sound of crumbling firewood. Mr. Joestar, Calm down, Abdul! The airflow changed again. Both suddenly found themselves in the setting of earlier, at the end of an alley. The nauseating smell of garbage, the street, the abandoned bicycle. But we're in the same place as before? Was it an illusion? It was not. Even after returning to the exact same spot as before, the stench of cremated bodies was still mixed in with the stink of the garbage. It isn't an illusion. Otherwise, it wouldn't be real. Enemy stand. Both, confused, perceived the faint voice, a voice so feeble it got lost in the bustle of the main street. In a distant past, in the era before Christ. The voice seemed to come from their immediate surroundings. Joestar and Abdul were somewhat perplexed. The people believed in the existence of 42 judges, whose presiding judge was God Osiris. I'm referring to the legend which narrates the entry into the underworld. A figure was beginning to be seen at the end of the alley. This is just a preamble of the grand history that I myself have compiled. It was the same mummy-like ancient who defeated Polnareff shortly earlier. A papyrus was clutched in the withered hands. The manuscript the old man held in his hands was the mysterious book discovered by the English research expedition, The Genesis of Universe.
God, the one who protected Memphis, capital of Egypt during the First Dynasty. His stand holds the divine revelations of that God.
Still clutching the book with the withered hands, he proceeds.
This, the so-called the Genesis of Universe, in which history is wisely kept.
The Genesis of Universe, shouted Joestar. That name sounded familiar to him. When he had retired, he finally allowed himself time for some hobbies, among which was history. But amidst all the reading, only one name had gotten to him, that of the explorer Stevenson, even if he'd always thought it had been a fake occult report. No way! So it really exists! And if that wasn't enough, it's also a stand! Joestar remained staring agape at the old man. Abdul instead had yet to recover from the shock experienced a moment ago.
I must have read about it somewhere. The stand of the Genesis of the Universe is very likely the posthumous image of the stand of a man who lived in ancient Egypt. In some respects, it's the same as God Anubis, which we ran into in Aswan.
God Anubis, a sword made 5 centuries ago by a swordsmith turned into a stand, and even after the death of the actual swordsmith, lived on. The more people the sword cut down, the stronger it got.
I don't know what kind of tricks you've used on the British explorer who found the book, but you stole it from him. Since then, you've been taken over by Genesis of Universe to this day. That's my guess.
Joestar stared at the old man with a challenging look, as if he already tasted victory. The old man, motionless, started leafing through the pages.
What's the matter? Don't tell me this stand is afraid, all because I cleverly saw through it and figured out its real identity. You are mistaken. In what way? Because in reality, that man is not dead.
Don't say nonsense. The Genesis of Universe was discovered in the ruins of 1500 BC civilization. He can't still be alive today. As Joestar spoke, shivers ran down his back. The ancient was always motionless in front of him. Looking at him better, he really did look like a mummy. I can't believe it. He shook his head and added,
He can't still be alive. The secret of Ba reincarnation,
whispered the old man. The ancient Egyptians believed that even if the body was destroyed, the Ba, or spirit, was immortal and could be resurrected into this world. That's why they created magnificent tombs and turned the corpses into mummies, so that the Ba could have a body to return to. However, I won't believe that such a mystery exists in the world.
Believe it or not, you're free to do as you please. In any case, my name is Ani the Scribe of your so-called New Kingdom era.
Ani the Scribe! Joestar had come across that name multiple times in ancient Egypt's history. He was astonished, worse than Abdul. In his heart, where enemy psychological warfare had never before reached, arose a feeling of numbness.
In 1166 BC, during the Crusades, the Christian army from Jerusalem arrived at the Nile River mouth.
Right. At that point, a considerable number of soldiers clad in a Western style of solid armour appeared. They seemed to surround Joestar and Abdul. On their large shields was seen a cross-shaped emblem. They were the Crusaders, that army which up to then he had only seen in religious paintings. Well, now it was right in front of Joestar's eyes.
The Crusaders!
A soldier brandishing his sword charged at him before he could finish talking. Joestar barely dodged it, but still received a gash on his cheek. He began to bleed.
So this is real.
It's no illusion.
It's definitely real!
There was no time to lose. The soldiers still brandished their swords, advancing right towards them.
No, it is no illusion, and neither is it something real, but the wound is really there. Help, Abdul!
I'm coming! He'd since learnt something new. This time they weren't human beings of flesh and blood, and so he recovered from his state of shock. Abdul called back his magician's red with cunning, aiming to threaten the soldiers without killing them. Come on, before it's too late! Both bolted off. Magician's red took the lead, and under Abdul's command, it cut with his fire through the wall of soldiers that stood in their way. Abdul and Joestar followed right behind it.
Legend tells.
The old man's voice rang out behind their backs, and the countless soldiers vanished in a cloud of dust.
What's his plan? Where'd the army go?
Let's not lose time. We take advantage of this and try to reunite with Jotaro and Polnareff. I still don't get this stand.
Agreed!
During their escape, the sky was obscured by something incredibly frightening.
Of the Sphinx, half woman and half animal, it said that to stop travellers in their way, she would pose riddles to them. Those who could not solve them would be devoured. So I've written in a chapter of the great mystery of Egypt.
This is a joke, right? Something blocked Joestar's way. I don't think so, Mr. Joestar. Look! It's the legendary demon, the famous Colossus, half woman and half beast that sits by the Great Pyramid, said Abdul. Obstructing the road was the demon with a feminine face and the body of a beast.
Shit, but that... I don't understand anything anymore.
The length of that being was around 5 meters. The body resembled that of a lion. She wore solid, bulky armor, roared ferociously, and sent spit flying everywhere. There was no way out. To the right and to the left were the walls of buildings. Ahead was the Sphinx, and behind was the old man, inexorably threading towards them. Damn it, Mr. Joestar, we're in trouble. We're between the hammer and the anvil. We don't know the extent of that old man's power. And then there's also the matter of getting away from the Sphinx's dangerous power.
Let's not lose any more time!
Joestar acted quickly. Blazing like lightning, Hermit Purple released from his arms. The vine stretched and wrapped around an emergency ladder attached to some house's wall.
Got it!
Joestar grabbed Abdul and, like a wire being pulled by a winch, he shortened Hermit Purple's vines. They climbed up the wall like spiders. The Sphinx roared. She readied her body like a coiled spring, about to burst into a tall leap. Mr. Joestar, come on!
Damn it, we weigh too much! We can't lift up high enough!
Meanwhile, a crash, like that of an explosion, boomed around them. It was the Sphinx, who had reached up the building's wall. They had just barely arrived at the emergency ladder. They were on the 4th floor. The Sphinx, upset, clawed at the walls, but even as she had jumped, she'd fall short of them.
Let's get out of here!
The knob of the emergency exit didn't turn. It seemed to be locked from the inside.
Oh, shit!
They slammed against the door violently. Even if it was thick and made of steel, with the strength of both of them, it almost came unhinged.
Good grief. The enemy seems to have given up.
Truth be told, the Sphinx's roaring had faded away.
No! What is it?
Abdul, turning around, had changed into an expression of chagrin. At the end of the corridor, surrounded in darkness and dust, was an ancient Egyptian boat. It had 2 bows and no stern, and inexorably headed towards them.
These jokes have stopped being funny!
The ship kept advancing, ploughing through the sea inside that corridor.
How is it possible for a ship to be in here?
After saying this, Joestar found himself standing before countless soldiers who, standing on the ship, all wielded their weapons at the same time. A moment later, they were swept under by a shower of blades. I'm looking for someone. He wears a hat. Old man, good for his age, dressed as an explorer. He's around 1.90 meters tall. Have you seen him by chance? Asked Jotaro. But the street seller kept prattling on, with a small bottle in his hands.
Yeah, I've seen him somewhere, but I don't remember where. This perfume's made with lotus flower essence. It's a curious treasure from ancient Egypt. It's not expensive and it's perfect for a gift. You'll see, your girlfriend will be amazed. It's a natural perfume. Everyone wants one.
Jotaro remained impassive and calm, without letting his troubled state show. Night fell. He'd given up his search for Dio and returned to the hotel, but there were no traces of Polnareff, Joestar, and Abdul. Did Dio send an assassin? He had a bad feeling about it, and started searching all over Cairo without a proper destination. Finding no signs of them, he started worrying. He returned back again to the street vendor. He spent all day on the street trying to sell to the tourists. He surely must have known something.
Well, shoot, if you help me out and buy this perfume, maybe I'll be able to remember something.
Yada yada does it. He can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. Jotaro handed him 10 Egyptian pounds. The street vendor smiled and, holding out the perfume bottle, pointed at the alley next to the old building.
Two travellers, or at least they look like so, went into that alley roughly a bit over half an hour ago, searching for something.
As soon as he heard those words, he dashed towards that alley. Indeed, Joseph and Abdul had plunged into that chasm between the buildings. The fight wasn't over yet. Joestar and Abdul barely avoided the deadly attack from the ancient ship and then took off. However, the situation was still quite dire. Rubble kept falling off everywhere. Again came that sinister voice.
It was 1300 BC, give or take a year. In other words, under Ramses' ruling.
It was the old man's voice. The rubble kept accumulating on the ground with no end in sight, but the dust ascended to the sky alongside that voice.
In the region of Luxor, the temple of our moon was started by a large temple, accompanied by a colossal statue. The statue of Pinachum, a high priest.
Then the rubble created a vortex, which was beginning to take the appearance of a giant.
So, I've written in a chapter of the great history.
The moment he stopped reading, the rubble and the dust had assumed a proper shape. A giant head with a leather hood, the body slender, arms folded, it was a stone giant of 7 meters. It's the statue of Pinejimon of Luxor, a relic from the kingdom of Ramses II. The giant's arms unfolded, and everything was enveloped in dust. The stone fists were flung at Joseph at full speed. Still, he, despite his age, could manage to avoid the giant's hits. However, while he was backing off, his legs bumped against something and he lost his balance. He tripped over the debris, and in that instant he saw his life flash before his eyes. The giant's fists kept chasing him. "Mr. Joestar!" Abdul screamed desperately, but he didn't make it in time. His magician's red wasn't in range. Joestar reached his iron hands out, but it was useless. He had no way out of the situation. "Polnareff!" A man as quick as lightning showed up out of the blue, shoving Joestar. It was Jean-Pierre Polnareff alongside Silver Chariot. Joestar and Abdul tumbled to the ground, getting tangled up. The giant's fists met the floor, leaving behind a crater in the ground.
Right on time, Mr. Joestar. Where the hell have you been? And that wound.
What? Polnareff suddenly stood up, shaking the dust off himself. I've had a couple run-ins with this mummy a bit earlier, and I got stupidly wounded by distraction. Then, with eyes sharper than his chariot's own blade, he turned to the old man, standing in a corner, and added, "You thought you were done with me? Well, I'm sorry for you, but I've got some thick skin." The chariot controlled by the old man hadn't had the desired effect on Polnareff. His indomitable fighting spirit had allowed him to make a furtive comeback.
"Polnareff, watch out! The giant's about to attack again,"
Abdul said, rushing in haste. The 3 Stan warriors were again united. "That old man's stance seems confusing. I won't say that the attack is necessarily the same as the one Polnareff suffered."
"What is?"
"The true nature of his stand." "The papyrus he has on his hands," That's the stand's source of power. Everything is related to what's written. The old man stood still in surprise. Polnareff kept talking. Essentially, he can control countless stands, but only by making them show up one at a time. Every single chapter contains one. Now I see. Indeed, Abdul and I have dealt with a handful of them. I found out how it works. Indeed! Silver Chariot, hovering behind Polnareff, drew its sword and pointed it at the old man. I, Jean-Pierre Polnareff, have decided to return you the favour. The old man let out an eerie chuckle. A chuckle that sounded more like the clattering of dry and rivered bones being dropped.
You're only some stupid insects.
The old man, in a quiet but apparently powerful tone, clarified.
So is the story in the book. So is recorded on the papyrus. But there's still more to say. This is the power of the genesis of universe.
All three, side by side, paid full attention to the ancient's words. At the same time, the stone giant returned to being motionless.
I don't expect at all that you manage to understand the history I'm reading. It's the grand history of Egypt. You are proudly satisfied to shine for a few decades of life, of Fermin's existence.
The old man raised the papyrus and once again breathed life into the gigantic stone statue, with the racket of 1,000 pieces of armour rubbing against each other. The colossus took a step forward.
Defeating this, the genesis of the universe, where the history of Egypt, spanning from the ancient times to the future, is kept, is...
The giant, with a leap, turned itself into a projectile headed straight for them, in order to destroy them.
Impossible!
I'll turn you back into a relic. In fact, I'll kindly make you return to the cemetery you came from. Joestar and Abdul tried in vain to hold back Polnareff, who had a burning rage lit in his eyes. A stone statue is nothing against Silver Chariot's sharp sword, Polnareff shouted, pointing right at the colossus alongside his stand. He brandished the sword and its glow drew an arch. That trail of light split the statue in two in less than no time. It seemed to be... What the hell? Gone. The statue hadn't been broken. The pile of dust and debris was the same as before. The sword hadn't been fast enough. The old man had managed to cancel the Genesis of Universe's stand ability. However, immediately after, Polnareff was swept under an avalanche of 7 meters of rubble. The injuries he'd received in the previous fight only worsened, and with that rain of debris he also received new ones. Polnareff groaned and squirmed in pain. Polnareff! Cried Abdul, rushing to help. Polnareff began to drag himself out with the help of his arms. Here, come on! Abdul tried to move him to safety, but at the moment in which he had bent to get him out of that tomb of debris, he saw his friend become still. What happened? Abdul! Abdul had been skewered by an ancient Roman soldier's sword. He collapsed to the ground and blood began to gush out of his chest. Polnareff shouted once again, Abdul! There was no answer. In fact, falling on him, Polnareff hurriedly rolled to the other side, crumpling by the feet of Joestar, who was standing stock still. Abdul! Abdul! He shouted with all he had. It was too late. Abdul's body was half buried in the debris. Polnareff staggered forward, lost his balance, and slumped to the ground. He's dead. Or so it would seem, at least. The old man approached him and, always clutching the papyrus to his hands, looked down at him as if he were vermin. In fact, you're severely injured. You're a fool, you inexperienced human beings with your stands
cannot compete against the gravity of an Egyptian history of 4,000 years.
The old man still clutched the papyrus in his hands when a Roman soldier responsible for Abdul's wound disappeared.
And you too, are you scared to death? Why, won't you help out your friend? Well, if you don't hurry up, this man will soon bleed to death,
said the old man, laughing with a threatening and mocking tone. Then he stepped on Abdul's face with his bony feet. Abdul whimpered, unconscious.
Stupid vermin.
Then he spat on him. His viscous brownish saliva soiled Abdul's forehead. Hey, you! Polnareff couldn't take it anymore. Despite his brutally injured body, he found the strength to ignore the pain and charge against the old man, fueled by fury and indignation. However, wait! Joestar grabbed him from behind, attempting to quiet his rage. Let me go, Mr. Joestar. Abdul has saved my life in Calcutta. That bastard, that piece of shit. He has to pay for it once and for all, even if it costs my life. I'm telling you, let me go! From his voice, it sounded like Polnareff was crying, but that was not the case. Let me tear that bastard to shreds! Polnareff! Yelled Joestar, grabbing him by the shoulders. Listen, you think I'm the only one who's angry. I also feel the same way. I'm seething. Try to understand, Polnareff. If we keep like this, we won't solve anything. Abdul will make it, you'll see. His heart's still beating. But Mr. Joestar, if we keep acting on impulse, we'll end up just like that. We must focus on the genesis of universe. Its power depends on the book that the old man's holding in his hands. Calm down. Relax. We don't have the means to fight back. Relax? Yes, because losing your cool on the battlefield can end up badly. We must come up with a good plan. We must find an opening and unleash an attack, aiming at his weak spot. Understood. Okay, I get it, Mr. Joestar. If we don't make it, however, Abdul will be done for. Now, let's come up with a sound plan. Both started communicating through their stands. It was a mental exchange of ideas, a telepathic conversation. Normally, it would have taken them multiple minutes, but the telepathic connection ended after just some seconds, since it was a conversation between stands. Well, what did you decide? It seems that in regard to your companion, his heart is no longer beating. Thus, he will be judged at the gates of the underworld by the 42 judges that he himself reduced to ashes. Having said this, he stomped one more time with his bony foot on the collapsed body of Abdul. With each hit, Abdul's arms twitched out and shook. Well, what shall we do? The ancient said in a triumphant tone. The only problem left to solve for the old man was the excessive attachment to life that Polnareff showed, but in the end it didn't matter to him anymore. All that was needed was to torture him. He'd sworn eternal devotion to Dio. He worshipped him, the ruler of the world, the immortal man who'd chosen Egypt as his lair. Joestar and Polnareff, yelling like madmen, threw themselves on the old man at the same time. Mr. Joestar! Now! They split up. Any direction was game, provided they managed to deal him the death blow to ensure their survival. Risking your own life, that's the harsh rule of war. Joestar and Polnareff approached with wild-eyed looks, and in an instant came up with an attack. You human beings can't make it. You've abandoned a friend and have charged without a proper plan, said the old man, gripping the edge of a page of the Genesis of Universe. Hermit Purple! Silver Chariot! One from the right, the other from the left, they moved like bullets towards the old man, attacking from both sides, and then simultaneously, both unleashed lightning-quick attacks. Take this! This is for Abdul! Both stands were released.
You will be judged at the gates of the underworld.
Behind the old man's back appeared an army. It was the allied forces of Antonius, who had fought fearlessly against the Romans. Just a bit more! At least they stab on it or something.
The genesis of universe.
Joestar, at his limit, extended the vines of hermit purple as far as he could. In the meantime, Polnareff drew out Silver Chariot's sword. It was too late. They were too far to make it. However, Hermit Purple managed to brush the genesis of the universe the old man carried in his hands, and Silver Chariot left faint scratches on the cover. Meanwhile, the soldiers had pulled their bowstrings simultaneously, shooting out countless arrows. From the noise, though, it seemed like only one had been released. The shot had actually been instantaneous. The arrows released by the soldiers from the right ring aimed at Polnareff, those of the left were instead headed at Joseph. The old man was in the middle. A successive attack at close range, hard to avoid. The arrows increased dramatically. Shit! Both tried to dodge the arrows, but there were too many of them. It was the end for them. They managed to avoid the first half, but then the arms, the stomach, the legs and the back were consecutively skewered by the rest of the deadly rain. Swept back by the vehemence of the arrows, they went a bump into an unseen wall. A crack, and then Joestar and Polnareff collapsed on the ground. The noise that had been heard was probably from the fractures they'd both received. They could no longer get up. Staring at them, satisfied, the old man closed the pages of the Genesis of Universe, and at the same time, the soldiers aligned behind his back also disappeared.
It has ended. The only ones left are Jotaro Kujo at his stand, and then that bug, Noriaki Kakyoin, that's still being treated. Soon even they will die, thanks to the Genesis of Universe. This is another chapter of the great history that I wrote.
Reclamence could be heard in the air. It was the groans of Abdul, Joestar and Polnareff, helpless, agonized, and covered in blood. But the echo of the old man's laugh droned that whining.
There were no mistakes in this history. As I am the history, the great history of Egypt,
he said, raising the Genesis of Universe. The legendary book came to light in the Valley of the Kings. A book of nightmares that materialized through the power of his stand. Thanks to the mystery of transmigration of Ba, documented in the book, Annie the scribe obtained eternal life. 3 men were lying on the ground in front of his eyes.
Good. The time has come to send you to the gates of the underworld.
For Abdul, Joestar and Polnareff, the last hour was approaching. The old man, better known as Annie the scribe, would have eliminated them in an instant with his stand. At this point they were close to death. The old man browsed again the pages of the Genesis of Universe. His face hinted a menacing laugh, but before killing them he would have to find the right page. Then it would have been sufficient to halt on the exact point and read it under his breath. Only this way he would have been able to summon, at his discretion, the events there described. But in the moment in which he was about to read, "You're quite disturbing indeed. Seems like you stepped out of a museum." Behind his shoulders echoed a voice, a deep voice, an energetic voice, threatening and commanding at the same time. The one who spoke had been Jotaro! Joestar, lying on the ground and on the verge of unconsciousness, found the strength to pronounce that name.
Jotaro,
repeated the old man.
Jotaro Kujo.
Who knows when he got closer? Jotaro Kujo was behind the old man, emanating a fearsome fighting spirit with clearly murderous intentions. A warrior who manipulated the stand Star Platinum with exceptional power, ultra-precise movements, and unmatchable speed. The man in which flowed Joestar blood.
Oh, you, Jotaro Kujo. They say that you're very afraid of Lord Dio.
It's dangerous, Jotaro! Watch out for that man. Stand! Joestar yelled desperately. But Jotaro silenced him with a look. Shut your trap, Grandpa. I think I've basically understood who I'm dealing with. Suit yourself, Jotaro. But I warned you, it's risky to get closer to that man.
Exactly,
added the old man, looking at the genesis of universe.
Even though you're so close, I'm already at a point where I could summon the contents written in the book in the blink of an eye.
It was indeed true. It materialized the contents of the genesis of universe. All he needed was to silently read the text of those pages. However, as it has become clear from the events up until now, the old man finished reading the contents of a page at the same time he selected it. Interesting.
Interesting.
You won't have the time to summon your local knickknacks. From this distance, my Star Platinum will break you in half like a watermelon in no time.
Is that so? But even if your attack would be supersonic, it would never be able to take down what I materialize.
You want some proof?
Imbecile! Insignificant human being! You have only a few decades to live. Why the rush to die?
Back off, Jotaro! Shouted Joestar, crawling on his arms because of his fractured legs. It's the genesis of the universe. It's not a stand like the others. Run away before it's too late. Don't worry about us. Shut up, Jotaro replied menacingly. The surrounding air vibrated. Stay there and be quiet. There's no stopping it now, Joseph concluded as much upon hearing Jotaro's voice. Until now, that's how it went, having to hold back Jotaro Kujo, my grandson, who's trembling in silent anger. The old man, meanwhile, was sure he'd already run. A successful plan. His next card would have been the beast goddess Ammit, a very powerful demon who fed on the still pulsating hearts of sinners that got judged at the gates of the underworld. The people whose hearts get devoured by Ammit. It's said that they are removed from this world, not just in body, but in soul as well. Ammit, or Ahamite, the largest and most powerful demon among the Egyptian legends. And now the old man had already finished the silent reading of the pages describing this demon. Ammit was secretly being summoned under the rubble below the old man's feet. Jotaro, on the other hand, still believed he hadn't finished reading those pages, not to mention he wouldn't dream of thinking a demon would appear from under his feet. This was a certain victory against Jotaro.
What is it? You're not coming yet?
He asked impatiently. However, Jotaro understood that the next attack would have been the final one. The old man had probably saved him for the fiercest pages, and he would have launched an attack of unprecedented strength. But what would have been the weapon? Himself? The genesis of universe he gripped in his hands, or something he hadn't shown yet? What to do? The sun was setting. Cairo's evening. The surrounding landscape was painting itself red. Jotaro and the old man glowered at each other. Their shadows were stretching more and more. A horse's neigh was heard. If one paid even more attention, the hustle of the street could be heard. The cars' honks, the people's footsteps, the voices of the peddlers, anything that made a sound. After that, it felt like there had been a long, drawn-out pause before Jotaro finally made his move. The victor would be the first to move. That saying gave him a sliver of hope. Hurrah! A cry, and then Star Platinum, the long-haired warrior stand, appeared behind Jotaro's back. Its lethal punches had the power of destroying anything on Earth's surface. A soldier full of hatred, rage, and resentment, Jotaro's blood boiled in his veins. He had to use all his strength and focus it to defeat the one obstacle that stood in his way. In the meantime, the old man snickered.
You're finished.
Jotaro tripped, and Star Platinum was affected by it. What? The ground beneath Jotaro's feet was rising. It was Ammit, the beast goddess that the old man had summoned previously. She emerged from the surface like a mountain. Jotaro! Joseph's voice got lost in the clamour of Ammit's appearance.
Are you ready to be judged, Jotaro? I'll let your heart be devoured and I'll make you disappear once and for all.
The head resembled that of a crocodile. The upper body half was of a lion. The lower half resembled that of a hippopotamus. Her sharp claws would have torn apart anybody. Ammit, her bulk matched that of a trailer truck. Even Star Platinum, big and strong, became tiny in front of that being.
I had already called her earlier. Now it's too late,
roared Ammit. Her roar didn't resemble that of a beast. Its impetuosity rather resembled the rumble of an avalanche. The giant bent in pursuit of Jotaro, who was at a disadvantageous position. From her mouth, teeth akin to pillars could be glimpsed. She spread saliva everywhere.
Go to hell!
Jotaro was ready. Star Platinum launched a rapid series of attacks against Ammit's snout. It was like throwing a fistful of gravel in the sea. Ammit didn't budge a millimetre. No luck. Jotaro bolted backwards, ferociously attacked by Ammit. The latter chased him with her maws wide open, aimed at his chest. The heart was Ammit's favourite meal. The voice of Jotaro Star Platinum was interrupted. At the same time, the roars around them died down. Had they finally met their end? Wrong. It wasn't Jotaro who vanished, but Ammit, the beast goddess.
This appeared, vanished, but how is it possible?
Against the old man's will, Ammit disappeared in a cloud of smoke.
It's not possible!
In the meantime, dizzily shaking his withered arms, he rushed to browse through the pages of the Genesis of Universe. Then his scrawny fingers located a spot. There was a tiny hole. Something had perforated the hieratic text.
No way!
It had been Joestar. Joseph and Polnareff's preceding attack hadn't been done randomly. Joseph had been able to read the contents of the Genesis of Universe thanks to Hermit Purple's vines, and Polnareff, listening to what Joestar read, had pierced the characters in some pages thanks to Silver Chariot's sword. I wasn't out of tricks. I had a bit of knowledge and my Hermit Purple's clairvoyant abilities. Even with both of those, I only managed to decipher the titles of the pages in broad terms. Then the tip of Polnareff's sabre did the rest, said Joestar to the old man, despite his pain. But it was enough! I foresaw that your death blow would have used the most horrific thing described in this book. And you did exactly that. That's Joseph Joestar's battle intuition. I would say I haven't lost my touch.
You have damaged the history. A great history. This is serious to say the least. Unforgivable,
said the old man with a tremulous voice. Well, what do you intend to do?
It doesn't matter. You just removed only a few characters. The Genesis of Universe still stores many more events. I'm left with plenty of choices on how to kill you.
Remaining still, he got ready to browse through the pages for the umpteenth time. There was enough time. Jotaro was knocked away thanks to Ammit's attack, and so he was out of his stand Star Platinum's range. He wouldn't be able to make it. The old man was about to read, but Star Platinum was quicker, and threw against him a shining little object. The drops of a crystal-clear liquid spread in front of his eyes. The hoarse yell was proof of his agony. He rubbed his eyes with the bony arms, and while screaming, he let the Genesis of Universe fall.
My eyes! The eyes!
It was of poor quality. I was right to not use it. Jotaro cautiously got closer to the suffering old man.
What the hell did you do? What have you done?
I guess this wasn't written in your book. Well, it's a cologne made of lotus flower, typical of Egypt.
Damn you!
Jotaro had thrown him the small bottle of perfume he'd bought, rather, had been forced to buy earlier from the peddler. That tiny flagon of little value had hit the old man, and the contents sprinkled on his face. Didn't you say I had to be judged?
My Genesis!
He rubbed his eyes with his right hand and despairingly felt the surface at his feet with his left hand. But the Genesis of Universe was already in Jotaro's hands. What a grimy book.
Give it back. It's mine. The Genesis of Universe. It's mine. Mine alone. Give it back.
Jotaro wasn't facing a stand user with 4,000 years of Egyptian history on his shoulders anymore. At this point, he wasn't anything but a withered old man close to death. Listen, even if you're very old, I won't go easy. I'm warning you. The old man let out a weird cry. Behind Jotaro silently appeared Star Platinum. Its right hand slowly made a fist. Then, the one to judge will be me! The old man's body got hammered down by a flurry of hits. He resembled a mummy because he was a mummy in every aspect. He turned into ash and dissipated into the air in microscopic particles. He hadn't been a human being in a long time. The punches of Star Platinum provoked a variation in pressure, and all of that dust vanished into Cairo's sky. At the same time the old man was scattered, the Genesis of Universe that was in Jotaro's hands turned into dirt and spilled between his fingers. It had become a reddish-brown dirt and mixed with the ground of Cairo. The Genesis of Universe had disappeared once and for all from the face of the earth. Fortunately, Shellstar's fractions were nothing to be concerned about. The sword that pierced Abdul also missed any vital organs. Polnareff had been hit in several spots, but none of them had threatened his life. After having received appropriate treatments, they all met again in a cafe.
Jotaro, if it hadn't been for my fast reflexes, by now you'd be wandering the world of the dead for all eternity.
Give me a break, Grandpa, said Jotaro, sour due to Joestar's ironic giggle. No, Mr. Joestar. If it hadn't been for the intervention of my silver chariot, I don't know how it would have ended, intervened Polnareff.
Well, in any case, it was me who had the idea. You shouldn't forget that.
Anyway, even if we were beaten thrice by that ugly old man, the most important thing is that we made it out alive.
Come on, don't make that long face.
But it was Abdul who, with his head still bandaged and sore, had butted in the lively conversation between Joseph and Polnareff. But what happened exactly? In the end, who was that old man? He called himself Ani the Scribe, but had he really lived for millenniums? Or was he just a crazy megalomaniac? Well, we'll never have an answer either way, said Joestar, sipping coffee and turning towards Jotaro. What do you say? The reply was disappointing, but perhaps it was the only one that fit just right at the ending of that bizarre battle. It's not that important. At any rate, it's just sand in the desert.